And chapter 20 of the Smart Sales System focuses on getting into new accounts. And what we're really talking about here is we're talking about getting engaged with net new accounts or contacts, not engaging with inbound leads or engaging with current or past customers. This is getting engaged with accounts or contacts that don't know who you are, which, by the way, this is one of the most difficult things in the world of selling. And just simply getting prospects to answer the phone, if you have done any cold calling, you know that it's extremely difficult in today's world just to get people on the phone or to answer the phone. You know, throughout the Smart Sales System, we've been talking about creating your sales message and doing consultative selling, and we've been talking about cold calling and cold call scripts and whatnot. You know, that's all very extremely important, and those are all keys to success. But at the end of the day, if you can't get a prospect on the phone or get engaged with them, you could have the best sales message. You could be the best salesperson in terms of personality and charisma. You could have the best product. Your product could be priced perfect. But if you can't get engaged, all of that greatness will do you absolutely zero good. You have to get engaged and get in front of customers in order to use all those great things. The bad news is that it's extremely difficult to get engaged. The good news is that I will provide you with actual processes and tips that will help you to get engaged and to work through that challenge. Now, I'm going to provide you with 3 different things, and these are real things that you can implement. This isn't hypothetical, fluffy stuff, fluffy concepts about you got to work harder than the others, you got to work when others are sleeping. You know, this is not hypothetical stuff. This is real stuff that you can implement regardless of your skills and experience. The first thing is that we're going to talk about is prospect cadence. I'll explain what that is. The second thing we're going to talk about is organizational movement. And the third thing is concentrated prospecting. So drilling into the first thing of prospecting cadence, a question that is often asked by salespeople is, how many times should I call or cold call a prospect, right? What's that magic number? And you know, there are some white papers written on this, which is it takes 9 touches to get engaged with a prospect. And you know, I think the intentions with that logic or those concepts are good, meaning, yes, I agree that you have to contact and touch a prospect multiple times, but at the end of the day, I don't think that it's necessarily there's a magic number of you must contact them this many times. So I'm not going to give you a number and say this is how many times you should call. Here's what I can say with very extreme confidence is that you are most likely not calling enough. And so we can expand the calling to also include emails. How many emails should you send and how many voicemails should you leave? But at the end of the day, it's how many times should I reach out and try to call this person or reach out before where I know I'm not bugging them and that I'm not walking away too early. And let me just give you a hypothetical scenario here. Let's say you have a cold prospect. Let's say you send them a cold email. Then you call them a couple times. You leave them a voicemail message. They don't return your call. They don't reply to your email. You can't get them on the phone in your 2 attempts. You leave them a voicemail. You pause for a week or a few days. You try them maybe one more time. Through all that, you think, man, I really try to get a hold of that person. They must not be interested, or I'm just never going to get a hold of this person. And you move on because you gave it a good effort to reach out to them. Well, that might sound logical or a decent place to reach in terms of your conclusion, but let's go back to understanding the prospect. First of all, you sent them an email. We talked about how prospects are getting a lot of emails that they either might not read your email or it's just a good chance that they may not reply to your email. Then you call them a total of 3 or 4 times. Well, we talked about how prospects are most likely not at their desk a majority of the day. and yeah, you left them a voicemail that they didn't return, well, that must mean they're not interested. But if you recall in the last chapter when we talked about voicemail messages, it's most likely that qualified prospects that are decision makers and extremely busy are not going to return a cold call from a salesperson. So the fact that they didn't call you back doesn't mean anything. And when you look at all that, you should realize that you did not contact that person enough before walking away. So what I'm going to show you today is I'm going to show you a process that's built around what we call prospecting cadence. And this process, if you follow this process, you'll have confidence that you've really pursued this prospect before you're walking away. And it should alleviate your concerns of, am I calling enough or am I walking away too early? And so to dig into what exactly the prospecting cadence is, if you're not familiar with the word cadence, another word for cadence or a word that's synonymous with cadence is rhythm, right? So if you think of rhythm in terms of music, a musician or a band, when they're playing music, the music will have different tempo and a different beat. And the beat, there's different instruments and different notes that will be played and communicated according to the tempo, according to the beat, and according to the rhythm. And all of that, those different instances deliver the message of the music to the person that's listening, right? So that rhythm, you can then use that same concept of rhythm and apply that to your cadence of how you're communicating to your prospects. And instead of a piano and a drum set and guitar, keyboard, all that, your different instruments are your emails, your calls, your voicemail messages, could be your social media outreach, all the different ways that you can communicate. And also part of your cadence is what you're saying in those communications. So that's kind of the notes that you're hitting. So if you think of a musician, they have the instruments, they have the notes, and then they have the beat. So you as a salesperson, your instruments are your ways of communicating. The notes that you're hitting is your sales message. And the beat and the tempo is the frequency of your outreach. So we've already talked about the different instruments of cold calling, cold emailing, voicemail messages. Now let's talk about sort of the rhythm of how those all tie together. I'm going to just kind of go through a workflow here of how you can string all those things together. Well, the first thing you could do with a cold prospect is send a cold email. So you send a cold email, and we can kind of look at this as day one of your prospecting cadence for this particular contact. So you send a cold email, and then during days 2 through 7, you are calling the prospect multiple times without leaving a voicemail message. You could call them once, you could call them twice, a few times. You know, as I mentioned in the last chapter, if you don't leave a voicemail message, you could call every day, and it's in my opinion and my philosophy that you're assuming they don't know you called, so you can call them every day and you're just trying to get a hold of them. Call as many times as you want during the period of 2 to 7 days, and this is 1 week, right? So after 2 to 7 days, then we're progressing to week 2. And at this point on your next call, you're going to leave a voicemail message if you're still not able to get a hold of the prospect. And as we talked about in the last chapter, the best practice after leaving a voicemail message is to follow up that voicemail message with a voicemail follow-up email. And that's day 8. And then because you just left a voicemail message, you should pause after every voicemail you leave for a period of days, right? While I believe that if you don't leave a message, you call the next day. You don't want to leave a message and then call the next day. You need to pause. Regardless of what your voicemail message is, you just need to give some space there. The pause could be days 9 through 14, but to simplify, this is just a stretch. This is a process stretched across a 2-week period. Now, this is just the beginning of the prospecting cadence, and this is what we refer to as round 1. So the prospecting cadence is really 4 rounds, and it's just this process repeating for across sets of 2 weeks. So this is round 2. It's the exact same process, just starts in week 2 and week 3 and week 4. Then week 3 is week 5 and week 6 is round 3. Same exact process, same exact steps. You're pausing in between rounds, and then round 4 is week 7 and week 8. And if you put all that together, this is what it looks like. Now, you'll notice that each round has a cold email and a voicemail message. So in our building blocks and in the email message templates that we've discussed so far and the voicemail messages that we've discussed so far, there are 4 different sets of those that you could use, meaning you could use a set of your different building blocks for each round. So what that might look like is for round 1, you start off sending cold email message with your value points. And then when you get to week 2 of round 1, you're leaving your voicemail message with your value points, and you're sending your voice message follow-up email with your value points, and then you're pausing. Then you reach round 2. Now you're going to send another cold email, and your cold email will be your pain points cold email. So you're sending a different message. By the way, when we talked about cold email prospecting, I talked about how a lot of salespeople, when they send their second message, they usually don't have another message to send because they put it all in the first long email with all their product details. Then they need to send their second email. They don't have anything else to say, so they just say, hey, did you see my other email as email 2? Well, no, with this process, you're going to send a different email, a different message that might hit a different button that maybe you missed with your first message, or maybe they saw your first message and you're continuing to build and educate the prospect. But the voicemail for round 2 can be pain points. Voicemail follow-up email for round 2 can be pain points. Moving to round 3, your cold email could be your name drop building block, and you can use the corresponding voicemail and voicemail follow-up email. Then round 4, which is the final round of the cadence, by the way, is where you could use your product building block. As I mentioned, we want to kind of hold off on talking about our product. Well, now this is the end of our cadence. We've already sent a bunch of emails, and we're maybe close to kind of walking away or giving up, but we're going to send the product message maybe for round 4. It's an option. By the way, all of this is optional, so get ideas from this. If there's only one idea to take away from this, is this should reinforce that you're probably not reaching out to a prospect enough. And while it looks like there's a lot of calls, you could make as few or as many calls as you want. I mean, each round may have 1 or 2 calls, or it could have 5 calls. Get some ideas from this and build it into whatever you want, or follow it exactly. Now, by the way, if that flow there and that workflow looks complicated, this is actually more simple than it looks from this image here, because all you're doing in round 1 is you're sending an email and you're making calls without leaving a voicemail. Then the second week, you're calling and you're leaving a voicemail and you're sending a voicemail follow-up email. So it's not real complicated if you kind of simplify what you're doing. And that just repeats. So if you kind of look at it that way, and by the way, this kind of looks like it's Monday through Friday and then it starts on the next Monday. It doesn't have to be that way. It is week 1, week 2, week 3, and so on. And but it could start on Tuesday, right? So if you're sending your cold email on Tuesday, then the following week, your call and voicemail follow-up email should probably be on Tuesday if you're following the days. So that's the prospecting cadence. Now let's talk about organizational movement, which is basically moving around the organization. Because while I just showed you a fairly detailed prospecting cadence with a lot of touches, we should all be aware that there are still prospects that you'll still never get a hold of even going through all those steps. There are some prospects that just will never answer their phone and they will never reply to your email, regardless of what you say and regardless of how many times you call. There's nothing you can do about that, and that's just the world you live in, and that has to do with a lot of things we've already discussed, like your prospects being extremely busy and a lot of competition and whatnot, right? So based on the understanding that we've established of the prospects, it should not be a big shocker or a concern that you can make all those attempts and still not be able to become engaged. What the problem is that some salespeople do when they're not able to ever get engaged with their contact at a particular business, they then stop and move on to the next business. Well, what organizational movement is it's moving around the organization to find another contact or to find another way in. If you increase the number of contacts that you're trying to reach out to at an organization from 1 to 2, mathematically, even if both contacts are extremely difficult to get a hold of, you're mathematically increasing the odds of you getting in contact with one of them. You're kind of hedging your bet, right? The logic here is start with one contact, but when you're not able to get a hold of them, move on to find someone else. And so there's a process for this, and we call this organizational movement because you're moving around the organization trying to find someone else, but there's actually 2 types of organizational movement. There's vertical movement, which is moving up and down the organization. For example, let's say the key person that you're always trying to reach is the VP. Let's say the VP of IT, for example, which, by the way, VPs of IT are extremely difficult to get a hold of, right? So let's say you're trying to reach this person, they're not replying, you can't get a hold of them, right? When it's time to do organizational movement, what you can do is you can try to go above or below that person. So you could try to reach their boss. So if you're trying to reach the VP of IT, you could try to prospect to the CIO. Or you could go below and try to reach the director of IT. Adding those people into your cadence or into your prospecting pipeline, you're increasing your odds of getting in, as I mentioned. But that's vertical movement. There's also horizontal movement, which is moving sort of laterally in the organization across functional departments. So like I said, if you're trying to call into IT, in business-to-business sales, most likely you probably have 2 to 3 functional areas that you can sell into. This might not apply to everybody, but in most cases, whether you're aware of it or not, there probably are 2 areas. Even if you sell to IT and they're the ones who typically sign the check and do all this and that, it's likely that let's say you sell software, for example, or hardware or some sort of technical product. There's a very good chance that whatever that company buys from you, it impacts operations, for example. So when you're not able to get into the account by calling IT, maybe the VP of IT, you could move laterally to try to find someone to talk to in the operations department. And so if we look at the organization as a whole, what this might look like is we are trying to get to the VP of IT, and this person's extremely difficult. And if you make a number of attempts and can't get in and move on to the next account, and then you just try to call a VP of IT at the next account, and if you can't get a hold of that person, then you move on to the next account, your success will be much lower than if when you can't get a hold of this person, you move laterally and horizontally to contact all of these other people. Now, there could still be a chance that you try to contact all these other people and you still can't get in. But you are tremendously improving the odds of you being able to talk to someone. Maybe not get in, but you're at least improving the odds that you talk to someone by doing organizational movement. A great tool to use as part of this process is LinkedIn. The average employee is fairly motivated to use LinkedIn for different reasons. When they get promoted or get a new job, they often want to broadcast that and show everybody that they got promoted. So they'll often put their new position on LinkedIn. Employees at companies are also motivated to keep their LinkedIn profile up to date so they might find new opportunities and get recruited. You may have the contact, which is the VP of IT, off a list of leads that you bought or list of contacts that you bought. But when you're not able to get a hold of that person, go to LinkedIn and type in that company, and you can do different searches looking for departments or different individuals. And usually you can use sort of like the one contact that you have to find a whole different set of other people at that organization that might not be on your initial list of leads that you bought, but you can use LinkedIn to find those other people to use organizational movement for. You can actually combine organizational movement with your prospecting cadence. And just to give you an example, let's say you start with a VP of IT and you start with your prospecting cadence round one, right? So you go through week one, you go through week two, you're pausing, you're not giving up yet. You know that this person's extremely hard to get into. You roll into week two, week three, you're sending your second cold email, you're calling them again, you leave another voicemail, you're pausing. At the end of round two, this is a really good time to initiate your organizational movement. So when you press pause on that prospect, then you can shift gears, go try to find another contact at the organization, maybe go to LinkedIn. When you find that person, you're then going to start your prospecting cadence round one with the new contact. So now you send your cold email to the new contact. At this point, you'll have two different contacts at the organization in your prospecting cadence. You'll actually have two different cadences going on. So it's not just one cadence, but you're basically working two different contacts at that organization. And then you progress through the cadence with only really one step of organizational movement. What this allows you to do is once the initial contact drops off is when you're going to basically pick up a new contact from by the second contact progressing to the end of round two. I personally feel like this is a really balanced approach where you're not spending too much time on the one account. You know, if you have a set of accounts or territory that you're trying to work through, this is a fairly not too aggressive approach. Now, if you only have a couple accounts, you could get much more aggressive with this. You could do, let's say, organizational movement every time you press pause on a particular contact. That will load up your activity list with different callbacks for a lot of contacts at that one account. And that could really put a big thrust in you getting into that account. The downside to that is that, let's say you have a territory or you have an account list that you're trying to work, you could end up spending too much time on one account. So the one step of organizational movement is sort of a balanced approach, but just that's one example there of how to get some ideas of combining your prospecting cadence with organizational movement. The third thing I want to talk about is what I would call concentrated prospecting. And this is, it's not a real elaborate concept, but it's something that I kind of learned through trial and error. And so I think it's worth discussing because I think it's something that can easily be overlooked. A saying here that I think I kind of build this concept around is, don't be a mile wide and an inch deep. Try to be an inch wide and a mile deep. And what I'm referring to here is the target list that you are trying to go after and pursue. And to give you sort of the background on when I started thinking about this is when I had a salesperson working for me, and she was great. She was very smart, she had a great personality, and she worked extremely hard. And there was a project I put her on, and I gave her a list of like 500 or more contacts to call. These were cold prospects, cold suspects. And she was working this project, and I kind of, let her do her thing. And really, she was so good that I really didn't look over her shoulder, right? So after a week or two, I realized she hadn't generated any leads on this list of 500 contacts, which I thought was odd because that she hadn't produced anything. And I kind of sat down with her and I started and I wanted to go through the list with her and see what she was finding out or whatnot. And what she was doing on this list was she was working the list of 500 contacts, calling each contact once, and working her way down to the bottom of the list. And the problem with that is that, as we've discussed, because prospects are sometimes it's hard to get them on the phone, it's hard to catch them at their desk. She was not getting a hold of anybody. And at the pace she was going, because she had other stuff to work on, it would take her a month to get to the bottom of the list. And so what I felt was there wasn't enough concentration, meaning I wanted her to have multiple passes at contacting these people, if for no other reason, just to improve the odds of her message getting heard, or just to improve the odds of catching that in that particular person. And so I just felt like, and that's an example of she was a mile wide and an inch deep. She was only touching each contact once over a large period of time, and I felt like that was impacting her. And I just made one change with her on this project. I said, I tell you what, I gave her like 25 contacts from the list, and I said, just work these 25, and when you've scratched a lot of the list down, let me know. I'll give you another 25. And so she just focused on those 25, and she ended up generating a handful of leads, or a few leads, should I say? But more importantly, then she scratched off a bulk of the list, and I gave her another 25, and then she generated a couple leads. But a huge difference in once that focus was established. And so ever since then, I just, you can end up in this world where you have a huge territory. Maybe it's a whole state or a whole set of zip codes or just a huge number of contacts or businesses that you can go after, and or you end up purchasing a list of leads or a list of contacts, and you work too many of them. And so ever since then, I've really tried to get people that are working cold prospecting lists or territories to really break off a set and really have a focused approach to either get in accounts or disqualify them, and then add more. And so applying that to yourself, if you have I think a good list number for a list of contacts to work is 25 to 50. And so if you're doing that for yourself, or you're creating a prospecting list for a SDR or inside sales resource, I think 25 to 50 contacts is a good manageable list, depending on their workload and how much time they're spending during the week and during the day prospecting. But as that list gets down, then you can add more. Now, dealing with accounts, it's a little more tricky because the size of the account or the number of people that you can sell to at the account, there's different variables that determine how many accounts you should try to go after. I mean, there could be a case where you're working really big organizations and one account is a handful, or you're working small businesses and 50 businesses is the right number. So it's difficult to identify, and it could be the case that you're working big organizations, but there's only one person at each organization that you can sell to. Even knowing they're big organizations, you could still have a target list of 20 accounts, 25 accounts, or whatnot. But anyways, that's just a small tactic to incorporate with prospecting cadence, organizational movement. And so as you can see, when you combine those concepts with a good call script, a good message, and some of the other things we're going to talk about here in terms of dealing with objections and dealing with gatekeepers and whatnot, but you have good email messages, and when you bring it all together, you can certainly improve your odds of dealing with the challenge of it being difficult to get into net new accounts, and you can work around and deal with the challenge of it's difficult to get prospects on the phone or to get engaged.